If you've been paying attention to popular media, you've probably noticed a change over the last few decades where stuff gets a little bit less audience focused and a little bit more agenda focused. But that seems like it might possibly be changing. I mean, it kind of has to. Welcome back to another T-Rex Talk. My guest today is Ryan. Ryan, you work here at T-Rex. You don't like being on camera, but this is a fun topic that you got a lot of insight into. So I'm looking forward to continuing this chat. Yeah. If you haven't already seen a T-Rex Labs video that we just published, it's called Top Gun versus Ghostbusters or Ghostbusters versus Top Gun. And it goes over some of the things that have been changing in the industry. And I had a lot of thoughts on that video, but Ryan, you had to watch all the Ghostbusters clips that I picked as you edited the video, and it was unpleasant.
You know, I swore I'd never watched that movie, and I've seen more of it than I would like, even though it's just clips.
Ghostbusters 2016, by the way, just for clarification, the original Ghostbusters.
Yeah, great.
Surprisingly, holds up really well.
It does.
Ghostbusters 2016, you saw 10% of the movie. I pulled little clips, and
pretty cringy.
You did not appreciate that.
No, it was awful, terrible.
Yeah, but let's dive into the conversation. You and I both grew up watching media. Our fathers were both individually involved in film production, so we got involved in video and film production pretty early, have a rough idea of how it works behind the scenes. And I think we both grew up wanting to make movies. Movies were the height of the visual medium, and there's nothing that requires more creative capability than narrative filmmaking. Feature films are the height of the craft. Yeah. Everybody wants to make them for glory. You know, music videos are fun, TV commercials pay the bills, but movies are for glory. Yeah. But for the last 10 or 15 years, I haven't really wanted to make movies.
Yeah, I used to watch a lot of movies, and I haven't seen a whole lot lately. It's the shine of Hollywood is kind of worn off a little bit. Yeah.
So when did you start to notice that? Because I noticed it a little bit from the inside in New Zealand when there was a strong push to unionize in New Zealand. And I kind of felt like, I don't really want to be in this industry as much. I'd already seen the underbelly of the American film industry. I'd worked in New Zealand for a while. The unionization happened. I was like, I don't know if I really want to be doing this way. Yeah. I've already seen what this looks like in America. I really don't want to do this here. When did the shine come off for you?
Honestly, I feel like when Brokeback Mountain came out, that was kind of like I was kind of realizing like, wow, they're really pushing an agenda here that like no one really liked. I mean, it was kind of like joked about when the movie came out, but it was kind of the first step into that normalizing of kind of edgy worldviews.
Right. Where it was no longer studios saying, what do audiences want to see? Mm-hmm. It was, what are we supposed to be making people watch? Yeah. Yeah. Just kind of interesting to see that happen. And I remember at the time, people talking about the fact that this sort of looked like it was happening. I also remember a bunch of people telling me, no, this is absolutely not happening. This is entirely your imagination. Yeah. Yeah,
not so much. I feel like it was, it's been a concerted effort, and it's only been ramping up as things go. And now, like in the video we just did for Labs, it's just the number one goal is to educate or kind of forcefully educate, push an agenda, and entertainment, craft, all that is so secondary, maybe even tertiary.
Even the economics, and that's why I said it kind of has to change at some point. The economics don't work. If you are destroying people's childhoods, as they said in the video, if you're going out of your way to rehabilitate old franchises into a new paradigm, and audiences don't like that. And it's very expensive for you to rehabilitate the paradigm. And eventually you will run out of money because you're not getting paid by the audience to make stuff anymore. So at some point that has to come to an end. But the question is, are people going to realize that that's what's causing them to lose so much money? And in the film industry, there are clues like Top Gun Maverick that audiences are willing to spend a huge amount of money to watch a movie that doesn't talk down to them, that actually respects the source material and respects craft and respects what the audience is personally interested in watching. So there are signs in the film industry, but there's other industries that have jumped on board this kind of agenda train, or pushing the same wheelbarrow. The comic book industry is one.
Yep.
Video games is another major one, where in some ways I think the video game world is even more unforgiving because the big AAA titles take longer to make. They do take more money. And I think the failures are more obvious. People talk about movies failing at the box office, but most people don't really know what goes on behind the curtain. Like, studios are pretty upfront about what a movie costs to make, but they usually don't talk about prints and advertising money. They don't talk about the ways that the marketing budget was spent. If you're a giant studio like Disney and you own the production company and you own ABC, where you're going to advertise most of your movie, and you own ESPN, and you own the radio station, I forget what their radio network is called, and you own your own streaming service, you can write off all of your expenses and never make any money, but you still actually have cash flow happening. Or you can do the opposite of that. I mean, that's what studios used to do 10 or 15 years ago. They'd go to the investors and say, sorry, I didn't make any money because we had to pay the ESPN guys a bunch of money to run the ads that we already paid ourselves to make. But now it feels like they're going the other way, where they say, this show is absolutely gangbusters, and no, we're not going to tell you how many people are watching it. Where it feels a little bit like maybe they're cooking the books the other direction. Yeah.
Yeah. And, one of the things with games that is interesting is movies, they really, any movie that comes out is shooting for an age demographic, whereas games have predominantly a younger demographic. So that's probably the prime time to push some of these ideologies, is when people are young and their, minds are moldable. So yeah, I've been noticing it a lot in the game world. It's also not as forgiving in the game world. The game world, I feel like viewer counts, things like that can be hidden. Player counts are different though.
On Steam, everything's very public. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can push a game, and there have been many games that have come out that just absolutely flop. Concord is one of the big ones. But we're also seeing a lot of, franchises that are being kind of brought back up and reimagined into these woke kind of philosophies. And I feel like that's the best play, because they do release a lot of games like Dustborn was one of the games that came out recently. Was not built on a franchise, absolutely tanked, did terribly. But I guess they're counting on the return fans from these old franchises to come back and still buy the game.
Yeah, and there has been a temptation. I don't know how well it's worked, because you have to be... Your game either needs to do one of two things. You either need to be real upfront with the agenda that you are pushing, so that people who are on board with the agenda support your thing, and that's how you make your money. Or you be a little sneaky with it, and you push the agenda on people who are not on board already to convert them. And these are two very different business models. One, if you are trying to Trojan horse a new agenda into something that people are going to watch unwittingly or buy unwittingly, then you need somebody else's IP to hide that thing in. Yeah. So that's part of the reason that I think we're seeing, I think we're actually seeing studios get confused over what they're doing. So like Concord was we're going to sneak this into people's computers by making it look cool, but also we're going to trumpet the sheer overt nature of our barrow pushing, so that the right group of people will come and support us. And kind of neither happened.
Yeah, they spent I think it's $400 million on that game. Yeah. And it just doesn't exist anymore now, which is Really interesting.
Yeah. So it cannot be played. It cannot be purchased, and it cannot be played.
Yeah. Anyone who pre-ordered it had it deleted from their account.
Yeah, which is fascinating. There is a TV show, I forget what it's called, but it's an animated TV show, video game anthology series on some streaming channel.
Yeah.
And they have a Conquered episode that is launching this week. But it's kind of pointless now because now it has nothing to advertise.
Yeah, it's interesting. I believe that's on Amazon. It's a bunch of stories based on games, and Concord is, I guess, coming back for one little round from the grave.
That episode took a long time to make, so it's finally launching. It would have been a great time if Concord had sold well, and then it kind of sagged a little bit because people were tired of it. Now would be the perfect time to drop that episode. So they were really assuming a lot when they put their money behind this thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of fascinating. Yeah. Yeah. So what do you see happening? What do you see happening in the future with the gaming world? Do we have a lot more terrible games in production that we have to get through? Are we seeing indie rise? You follow games closer than I do.
Yeah. I don't think we're going to see anything changing with the big studios anytime soon. I think they're going to keep pushing this. They might try to tone it back a little bit, which there are games that have done well that kind of have the diversity and inclusion stuff in it. Baldur's Gate did really well, but they really focus on making a good game. And it's not really, I don't feel like their emphasis was, let's push this narrative on people. It was, let's make a good game, and they made a really good game, and it did very well.
And this stuff got included by default.
It's included by default.
Yeah.
You can have a female character with a male voice and do all sorts of weird stuff, but it's, the game itself is a well-made game, and people played it. And I think that's the issue is, if your goal is to make good games, you will make good games, and you can have inclusion part of it. But if your goal is inclusion, you're going to lose the plot and make a game that no one wants to play, because no one really likes to be corrected and educated,
especially by like NPCs. Like, what was the game that you? I've lost track. It's not Dragonborn, not to be confused.
Dragon's Age.
Dragon's Age, not to be confused with Dustborn. Dragon's Age has some amazing clips of like being scolded by NPCs.
Yeah, you can get their pronouns wrong and they'll correct you. And
I'll tell you, one of the bottom of my things to do list is get scolded by NPCs in a video game.
Yeah, no thanks. Which, Dragon's Age is interesting and kind of sad, because the first, I believe it was Inquisition, came out. It was Game of the Year.
I remember seeing trailers, but I didn't play it. Yeah.
Had a huge following. I played it a little bit, but wasn't really that into it. But really good game. And the new game, I don't know how many years. It's been a long time since the first one came out. But the new game, we're rolling into the Game of the Year or Game of the Year awards right now. And the only thing it's nominated for is a made-up category called the Innovations in Accessibility, which is, I guess, the category of games that correct your pronouns.
Well, is it just too high profile a game to not give an award to, and that's why this award has been made?
I don't know. It seems like they kind of made a category just so it could have a showing at the awards. Yeah. But it's terrible. The player counts are awful. They are, Steam, the Steam DB and the analytics that Steam does, which break down player count, break down server count, things like that. We're starting to see some of the big developers wanting those kind of squashed and hidden.
Oh,
because
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't look good for your board review when no one's playing the game you spent millions of dollars on. It's
embarrassing for journalists, to be able to, journalists can't support a game as being a Super Smash hit when you or I can easily just fire up Steam. 4 people are playing this game. It's not a big hit, but I hadn't really thought about it as much from the shareholders' perspective. If your shareholders, your average shareholder may like DEI stuff, but they also would really like to have some sort of return on their investment. And when they hear that we just launched a gigantic, super expensive game that has 4 people playing it, it's got to be a bad earnings call.
Well, it also goes to show the kind of the lack of consistency. These investors get these tiny game studios or sometimes very large game studios to make these diversity and inclusion games. And when the games tank, they close the studio. So they're not really on the side of their people
right
that they have pushing this ideology, because as soon as like Redfall was a game that came out last year, did terribly, got canned, removed from the servers, and the I think it was Arcane, the developers, which in the past had made some pretty okay games, and they are no more now. They just got completely canned.
Obsidian looks like they are floundering.
Yeah, which is sad, because I feel like if you've played, Fallout New Vegas was an Obsidian game. A lot of the Fallout people would say that's one of the better Fallout games. You see these studios, they really had a good run, and whether intentionally or not, they've just kind of fallen into this reprogramming category where their number one goal is to not make a good game anymore. I mean, they would probably tell you that's their number one goal, but really it's to push a narrative.
It's kind of a fascinating thing. So we've seen this across the board in a whole bunch of different industries, where your ESG score for your company is a really important thing. And it's an important thing because people have just decided that it's going to be an important thing. We were told that if you want to buy and sell a business with a high ESG score is worth more than a business with a low ESG score. That is assumed to be the case for all mergers and acquisition stuff, even though the ESG score does nothing for the bottom line. It does nothing for returns. It does nothing financially. So it is really fascinating to see companies optimizing themselves for ESG scores that do absolutely nothing for business activity. And it's dumb when hard economic companies fall for this. It kind of makes more sense for media companies to do this, because if there is a trend, then it probably reflects the audience somehow. So ESG scores are kind of a thing where your creative types, your movie studios, your game studios, your comic books, like it's probably a more alluring sort of thing for them to grab onto.
Yeah.
It has not been a good business bet, turns out.
No, it hasn't. And it's unfortunate. It kind of seems like the plan is to destroy what you love. Like they take these franchises, whether we're talking about Ghostbusters or, Dragon Age or Assassin's Creed, these franchises that started off so strong and built this, really loyal following. It's almost like they have to take that and melt it down and recast it into this thing that fits their worldview. And it's just, it kind of leaves you nowhere else to go. I mean, that could be a good thing in the long run. Maybe new franchises will pop up and be forced to exist. And, it's great for indie gamers. Like if you are starting off a game studio and you want to get in there, as long as you can create a good game, you're competing against the big guys who it doesn't seem like that's what they're really trying to do.
Right. It's kind of an unfair playing field.
Yeah.
So, but in a good way if you're an indie guy. So that's another interesting thing that fascinates me about games. Games are a very new thing. Movies are pretty new, but we have over a century of film being developed as a creative discipline, studios, distribution. Like we've had a century of Hollywood being a thing and Hollywood movies being a thing. Games are a lot newer. And so it's really interesting that one of my favorite games of all time is Prince of Persia, and Jordan Mechner is the developer of that game. And he was really at the cutting edge. Games were brand new. He was inventing a game, and he was really pushing the boundaries of like, what can you do with 8 kilobytes of memory?
Yeah.
But also, what can you do with a game? How can you make it more of a storytelling medium than just Pong? What can you do with a man who is made up of 12 pixels? Can you connect the player to this 8-pixel character or 12-pixel character? I forget.
Yeah.
I forget what the prince actually was. It's probably actually like 18 pixels high. There's
big.
At least 8 colors. But he was really trying to figure out, how do we make a good game and what could a good game actually be? And people who are experimenting with a new technology or a new medium or something that is brand new, and they're doing something beyond mere refinement. It's just really fascinating to me. So I've always been really interested in games and the opportunity that they represent as a new medium.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're still kind of in that new medium space. There's still lots of things to experiment with and explore and tinker with. And so, it is frustrating to me that we already have kind of a copy of the big Hollywood system where you have the giant publishers. They buy and sell properties, and they buy and sell the smaller studios. And Steam, the difference though, I think, is that the film industry doesn't have something like Steam, and Steam, shockingly enough, really is a demonstration that if you have a platform that is free, that is open, that is transparent, you will dominate.
Yeah.
Even against people that have way more money than you and way more, theoretically Microsoft that owns all these games, owns all these properties, owns all these studios, owns the Xbox. Theoretically, Steam should be a small potatoes operation compared to Sony and Microsoft, but they are actually hugely powerful in this space.
Well, the consoles started off running the game industry, and now PC gaming is to be reckoned with. So Steam is, Xbox, all the big companies are still trying to scramble to do anything half as good as what Steam does. Just as far as being a marketplace and stuff like that. But yeah, as far as games being a medium for storytelling, I feel like even before games with, Dungeons and Dragons and kind of role-playing games, you saw people, there was this huge interest in being a part of the story. Mm-hmm. And, games have kind of naturally developed into that. And we see games like Death Stranding, that game is mostly a story. There's not much of a game to it. It's
basically a movie with some quick time events.
Yeah, but that's, it's a great game. And there is a huge desire to be a part of a story, to, be a part of a really cool story, which kind of going back to Half-Life 2, which I hope we get Half-Life 3 in my lifetime, please. But, that's, I was thinking of games that kind of had diversity and inclusion in them. And Half-Life 2 was a great game where, you are Gordon Freeman, a cis white male. I assume he's cis.
It's hard to tell.
You never know.
He
we'll find out in Half-Life 3.
Polygons when he started.
Yeah, but, kind of the main character in the game is Alex, who, she's a woman of color, and, her dad, Eli, you interact with him a bunch, and they're great characters in the game, and you've got diversity and inclusion in there, but I don't think anyone would, if you ask them, like, what's a great game with diversity and inclusion, they would think of that, because you don't think of it as a game that pushes that.
They're
it's just
actual people.
It's just part of the game, and it's a great game. So...
And when it came out recently, it didn't come out recently, but
the RTX update,
the RTX update was announced, and the player counts are through the roof. People are still playing that game over and above the new hotness that was just released with a huge marketing budget.
Yep.
It obviously has staying power. So I can see why alternative. The competitors, the big studio competitors, would like to have player counts hidden because they're embarrassing. Yeah,
they really are. They're embarrassing because you see games that come out like there was a game, Body Cam. 2 guys developed it. Really unique take on simulating the view from a body cam in combat, and that game is doing better than some of these AAA games. There's so many indie games out there doing better than AAA games. So I kind of wish, I don't think it's that complicated. It's just, if you make good games, you can have inclusion, you can have diversity, and those things are not bad. It's just this mentality of the number one message that we are trying to send to the player is you think wrong.
Yes.
And the things you like are bad.
You must
and
be
we got to fix you through a game. And it's just like, people mostly play games when they're trying to have fun and relax and not get in trouble.
Well, there's another aspect to games too, though, which is people play games to do stuff they're not allowed to do in real life. Mm-hmm. So maybe that is Grand Theft Auto. That turned out to be a pretty successful franchise because people are not allowed to do Grand Theft Auto in the real world quite as much as they are in the game.
It's not as easy to get rid of your stars.
Yeah, but there's also just the fact that building, taking dominion. These are things that are built into us. We want to solve problems. We want to fight bad guys. We want to do stuff that the game makes it easier or lower risk or lower friction to do those sorts of things. And so that ends up being a huge driver for what makes a good game is, does it let me do a thing I already wanted to do? And couldn't really do in real life. Like Subnautica lets me scuba dive in a way that I can scuba dive in real life, but I can't just immediately scuba dive and go build underwater submarine bases and stuff the same way that this game can let you do. So this kind of wish fulfillment is something that games need to understand. They have to lean into this. They have to let the player do something that the player wants to do. And they could certainly build games that feed positive desires over negative desires, but being told you must have a miserable time because you're a miserable person is just, I don't really want to pay $40 for that.
No. And I feel like probably in the workplace, people are subject to this DEI stuff where they get corrected and they feel like they're walking on eggshells. And you really don't want to replicate that. Like most people are trying to escape their humdrum work environment. And when you kind of have like your game is like your HR director and they're like HR correcting. Thanks. That's not a fun game.
Yeah. Yeah. And so one of the things that is really interesting, let's get back to Top Gun for a second, because one of the things that I think was really interesting about the success of Top Gun Maverick is, yes, it's sort of a return to form. Yes, it's visually a great film. Yes, we went back to a franchise and we got to enjoy the franchise without being told that we were bad for liking the original. So all those things are there that are good, and I think good examples of why it succeeded. But the other thing that's really fascinating was it just had such a hopeful sort of message, which a lot of things, I think people are really, really wanting to see that, to where the world of Top Gun Maverick, yes, it's very sad to me that F-14s we don't have them anymore. Only the Iranians have them. Like, that's very sad. But I was excited to see in that movie, like, we see Tom Cruise testing a cool new airplane. Mm-hmm. We see people doing cool stuff with F-18s. There is a sort of positive, hopeful message. It kind of dovetails with people who are excited about Elon Musk building rockets. Yeah. This is a world that feels like I want to play video games like Age of Empires or SimCity, where I get to build, where I get to do stuff, where there's hope for the future. Even Subnautica, it's a survival game, but you end the game by building a rocket. It's a thing that you can do. It's a thing that's possible. Yeah. And so there is this hopeful, optimistic side to Top Gun that I think is a huge appeal. And so games that allow you to build, that allow you to defeat evil, that allow you to solve puzzles, that allow you to have hope for the future, or even just think that you're making progress are big. And games that scold you are bad at giving you that. Even if they let you level up and obtain things, there still is this sort of oppressive HR feel.
And going back to Top Gun, one of the things that, and this is kind of a side, but one of the things I really loved about Top Gun, and maybe this is just showing my age, I love that they didn't do, it's not a green screen movie. Like,
it's very realistic.
They did it in jets.
There's a lot of CGI.
There's a lot of CGI,
but it's on top of really hard stuff.
Yes, and I feel like that was very appropriate to do a old school, a second version of an old school movie by doing it kind of the old school way. Mm-hmm. Yeah, real planes, real flying around. It just when you watch it, you're like, oh yeah, this feels right. This feels like Top Gun. Whereas if they'd have done it all green screen, which I'm sure it would have looked great, it wouldn't have had that same feel.
We got some pretty good green screen technology today. So this is something that has always bugged me a little bit. So in film, I worked in visual effects and animation. I did lots of CGI stuff, and I have seen CGI get a bad rap, as you have, over the last 10 or 15 years, when everyone's like, oh, doing it with the computer is lame, doing it the old way is cool. That's true.
Yeah.
good CGI is not bad. The problem is that most CGI heavy movies are bad for other reasons. And then there's a whole other conversation about how visual effects studios are often mistreated, and we could spend a little bit more time on that if we really wanted to. But this idea of CGI versus practical, I think people are usually missing the point. It isn't that CGI looks worse than practical. It's that practical effects and going up in jets forces you to think and to plan. It forces you to solve problems. Kind of talked about that a little bit in the video. I wish we talked about it more, but if you can just fix everything in post, then you'll just go improv stuff in a room, because why not? And then if you are actually blowing stuff up for real, you will think about it ahead of time. If you could be diligent enough to force yourself to think about stuff ahead of time, which small filmmakers often do, because their CGI budget is expensive for a small filmmaker with a small budget, they do think about stuff ahead of time, and oftentimes they end up with CGI that works really well in the story because they had to be as careful as guys who are actually blowing up cars and airplanes. So it is that really, I don't even know the right way to say it, but basically working backwards from your end goal, having the goal in mind and working backwards to achieve it. Yeah. That is a thing that Tom Cruise movies have because he pushes the stunts to such a ridiculous degree he has to do it. Tom Cruise has enough money that he could just go out and improv movies on green screen and get the very best ILM visual effects artists to fix them. Like, he could do these things. His movies are not better because he doesn't do these things. His movies are better because of the diligence that's required for what he does instead of the CGI. That's my opinion, but I feel like I have a lot of good reasons to hold that opinion.
CGI is a great tool. It's like it's a tool in the toolbox, but I feel like it's kind of like the hammer, and if you just go to town with the hammer too much, then you're going to wind up with a sloppy product. It should be used sparingly. There's obviously shots you cannot do without CGI that you absolutely need it for. But I feel like we do see a lot of stuff that could have been done better practically, and CGI is just kind of like the easy button. Yeah. That gets pushed too much.
Mm-hmm. I wish we had talked a little bit more about craft, because I think that's another thing that audiences can tell when they go to see a movie, but couldn't really articulate, like with the CGI thing. It is really obvious watching Ghostbusters 2016 and Top Gun Maverick that one of these films was made by craftsmen who care about film, and one of these films is not made by craftsmen who care about film. Yeah. And I don't know that the audience understands that that is a key difference, but I love the little montage that you put together of people goofing off in a room, and then Tom Cruise telling people, you have to do 3 months of flight school before you can go up into an airplane. People pretending to dance, then people having to go through the underwater escape training that the Navy makes you do to go up in the planes. Like, there is a very big difference between the way that these two movies are approached. And even though you can't maybe put your finger on it, the passion of one set of filmmakers comes through and is inspiring. And then, the laziness of the other group of filmmakers also comes through, and it's just not exciting.
I feel like I've seen a ton of behind the scenes content, and some of my favorite movies, when you watch that stuff, they tell you about how hard it was on set, how miserable it was. And this shot, we were in the cold water, or we were freezing, or, they put in blood, sweat, and tears. And you kind of see that, like, when a movie is just too easy to make and they lean on CGI and it's just like an easy shoot, then it doesn't translate into the film as much as those ones where people put in hard work. It forces them to become their character. And you definitely see the contrast between those Ghostbusters and Top Gun.
And it's not just the actors. I think it's everybody on set. If you don't have any skin in the game, the level of attachment that you have to the project, I think, is palpable. Do you remember, I forget when this was, years ago, but the motion capture Tintin movie that was made by Spielberg and Peter Jackson?
My kids love that movie.
So there's supposed to be more of those. They never showed up. Yeah. And I have a theory why. in the behind the scenes footage, the actors are doing a great job. You can see Peter Jackson and Steven Spielberg having fun together, and they're talking about how nice it is to shoot inside of a room. But I think it's interesting that they were sitting there drinking their coffee, being like, "Oh yeah, this is nice. We're not outside. Like we're not on the edge of a waterfall right now." But neither of them wanted to do it again. And there's some reasons for that for Peter Jackson with Hobbit stuff and studio stuff. But Spielberg has also not done another animated movie since then. I mean, Ready Player One is lots of motion capture, but I think that even Steven Spielberg, in his old age and his grumpiness and his, the appeal of shooting a motion capture movie in an air-conditioned, heated soundstage, he still is going out and shooting stuff outside because if the story is going to be real and you're going to be invested in it and involved in it and making hardcore creative story decisions, you kind of need to be a part of it. And so it's kind of interesting that some film directors, as they get older, they take easy jobs and then their work gets kind of terrible.
Yeah, I think there's something for being said for shedding a little blood and sweat into your project. And I feel like both Peter Jackson and Steven Spielberg, those guys have done movies where they've been out in the snow, they've been out in the rain, they've been out in the water, and they've invested some serious skin into the movie. And then you do something like Tintin where you're just kind of sitting around. That probably felt like they were cheating by the end of it.
I'm sure it was super fun, but
yeah.
So
it doesn't feel like work.
You're probably thinking of Jaws as a pretty hellish production experience for Spielberg.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You interviewed him, or you were on a
I was on
crew
a team,
interviewing him. What did he have to say about that?
So I have a really good friend who was a Jaws nut, and he started working on this project that kind of snowballed into this documentary called "The Shark Is Still Working," and we eventually interviewed everyone: Steven Spielberg, John Williams, Roy Scheider right before he died, and one of the things that Steven Spielberg said in the documentary was, if I would have made Jaws today with the technology that I had, just make it CGI, I would have ruined it. It wouldn't have been as good because, a lot of the things like the shooting the barrels and everything, those were made up on the spot because they had this elaborate track and pulley and train system under the water that the shark was supposed to do all these things and come up, and it just never worked.
Bruce never fully functioned.
Yeah, and not being able to see it, just seeing the barrels and the barrels going under the boat was just such a terrifying thing.
It forced him to make creative decisions that were...
It forced him to really create something that is timeless. I mean, Jaws is one of the best movies of all time, and it is terrifying to this day. And, Steven Spielberg, he set up the last shot of that movie, blowing up the shark, and he left. He thought, oh, my career's over. This is going to be a failure. But sure enough, those challenges, that hard work that he did paid off. And, we have Jaws now, and it's awesome. The subsequent Jaws 2, 3, 4, however many there were not as good, but
I haven't seen subsequent Jaws movies, but Michael Caine said that the house that they paid for is quite nice. So I guess they worked out for him. So it sounds like the viewer has probably noticed that we like movies. Mm-hmm. We grew up in and around filmmaking, and we're not doing it now. I mean, we're kind of doing it now. Like,
it's a new wave of YouTube media.
This isn't filmmaking, okay?
Yeah, it's not.
This is podcasting.
Yep.
And then when we make a weekly YouTube video, like, I don't want to say that that's like super easy, but there's no filmmaking craft to it whatsoever. It is communicating ideas, but it's a totally different thing. So, why is it that you haven't tried to make it big in Hollywood and work on the next Jaws movie? Let's pretend like they were still making good Jaws movies, or they were still making movies that were decent. You've written movies, I've written movies that never got produced.
Yeah.
You've worked on stuff that has worked. I've worked on stuff that has worked. Why are we a T-Rex now instead of this other thing?
Couldn't hack it.
I mean, part of it is, go on. Yeah.
I mean, it's...
I couldn't I mean, I don't think that you would survive in California.
I don't think I would. I don't think the movies I would want to make would get made
Right.
at least in mainstream Hollywood. So there's that. I mean, I maybe could have kept at it and done some more stuff, but I just really got kind of disenfranchised by the way that movies were going, the stories that were being told. I've written some screenplays, and I've got a few that I still think would be great movies. But yeah, it's just didn't really work out for me. I just kind of lost interest as Hollywood kind of devolved. Yeah. Hope it comes back.
I hope it comes back. Yeah. Because there is something that is really incredible about film. Now, I will point out, the fiction is silly and entertainment is nonsense. And we could all be doing nonfiction only and just training at the range 20 hours a day. We could do that. That would be.
You got to boost morale.
But you have to boost morale. And there are stories, fictional stories, I think are better at illustrating truthful points sometimes more than, let's say, even historical dramas.
Yeah.
There's a place for parables. There's a place for storytelling. There's a place for fiction. I think that these things are really deeply important. But there's another aspect to it, which is film is especially interesting to me because movies, a 2-hour feature film, in some ways it's not that substantial of a thing, but it represents teamwork between basically every creative discipline. There is the cinematography, there is the music composition, there is everything all the way down to costume design and fashion. Like every human creative endeavor goes into filmmaking. Yeah. And so if you make films well, you are doing a kind of teamwork that is kind of non-existent anywhere else, except for maybe games. Possibly really rich games would have some of that. So I hope that it isn't lost and just people are completely burned out on movies because studios chase high SG scores and streaming platforms optimized for the wrong thing, and we just stopped.
It's all cyclical. I feel like we're in a rough time right now with Hollywood. I hope that it bounces back, but storytelling and Jesus told a lot of stories. He told a lot of parables, and there's something about humans where if I can tell you something or I can tell you a story, and you can think about that story and identify with the characters and pull truths out of it that are going to be a little more precious to you. You're going to hold on to them more than if you were just told a truth. And I feel like that's, back to Jesus's parables. That's one of the motivations that he had for telling parables is I want people to walk away going, what did he mean by sowing the seed and the birds coming?
Yeah.
And like it, he explained it to his disciples, and there's probably people that walked away and they might have figured it out and then went, wow, that's incredible. So storytelling is something that, humans are designed to take in stories and to parse the truth of stories. So whether it's games or movies, I am more hopeful of, or more optimistic of the game world. As much as the big developers are kind of pushing a narrative, there's a lot more indie games that get more exposure than indie films do.
For sure.
There's
a lot more freedom. A lot of it is Steam, but there's a lot more freedom to publish a game on a phone or on a computer than release visual film type content.
Yeah. And you can tell your story that way. And, you almost get people a little more involved. They're spending a lot more time in your typical game. No one's playing a game for the same amount of time they're watching a movie unless it's a terrible game.
Right.
So you can really get into some amazing stories with games. And I love the way that that's kind of developing.
Yeah. Yeah. I've noticed when I read my kids a book, they engage with the ideas in the book based almost entirely on their engagement in the story and the characters of the book. If I just tell them the ideas that are in the book, like conservation, they don't really there's no connection. But if we read Two Little Savages and we talk about how you take care of your camp and how you don't hunt too many animals and all these things, because that's what the characters were doing in the book, it's amazing how much stickier some of those concepts are and how much more time they spend thinking through some of the stuff and applying it to their own lives. So storytelling is incredibly powerful. It's part of the reason that I think people that have an agenda wanting to take control of Hollywood and push things. It's another podcast episode is all the communists that were in Hollywood back in the day. Cause that gets talked about a lot by Hollywood. When Hollywood makes movies about the communists back in the day, they are hilarious because they're simultaneously, how dare McCarthyism accuse us of being communists? And look at these heroic communists. Look at how brave they were.
Yep. That's a little contradictory.
Yeah. So you're hoping that film and video games bounce back, or that games continue to have a strong indie subculture of appreciation for the craft.
Yeah.
Solid storytelling. We hope the games, continue to mature, and I'd really hope that movies bounce back. There's all this talk about how Tom Cruise is the last movie star, which is pretty undeniable at this point. But I don't think it's for the reason that most people think that it is. Like, a lot of people are just like, well, he's ridiculously handsome and has all this charisma. That's true. There's other people though that have that. Like, Tom Cruise is not the most unbelievably charismatic person in Hollywood. Sure. I think the biggest thing that comes across in his movie starness is the appreciation that he has for the craft, that he does his own stunts, that he makes people go up in airplanes to do stuff for Top Gun. I think that it is his passion for the craft of filmmaking and his passion for specific movies that makes him the movie star. Yeah. Not just the good looking bit.
He's got a old school work ethic too that some of the younger generation doesn't get. Just the ability to work that hard on something and to make it your life, which, I've heard that he's incredibly difficult to work with.
I can imagine. I will tell you right off of the bat, I'm not a huge Tom Cruise fan. Sure. I don't like Scientology. Shocker. Yeah. And I think that he would be really hard to deal with on set. However, as much as I don't want to work on big budget Hollywood movies right now, if Tom Cruise called me on the phone and said, would you like to come work on this movie?
Yeah, totally.
There's people in Hollywood I like better, but would be far less tempted to work with.
Yeah, I'll come work on your movie and get cussed out by you. Sure.
Yeah, I want to be involved in something that matters as much to you as Top Gun Maverick. Yeah. As silly and superfluous as Star Wars kind of dogfighting movie as it was, I would like to work on a project that people care that much about. Yeah. The passion is infectious. It's amazing how that works. Yeah.
It is.
So, yeah. So how should we finish off this episode?
I don't know.
We haven't really exuded a ton of passion in the episode, so it seems like a weird place to stop.
Well, I mean, I guess our passion is that storytelling is important. And as much as these industries of storytelling have kind of lost their way a little bit, there's still a little bit of a glimmer of hope out there. Right. It's not shining as bright in the film world, but I am very encouraged by the indie game scene. Yeah. And I guess I would encourage people to get involved. It's not that hard to make a game. There's, the engine, you used to have to build an engine for your game and have to figure out a lot of stuff. Unreal is remarkably easy to learn.
You've used it a lot in previous jobs.
And it's keep making games, keep telling stories that need to be told, because humans are never going to move past our ability to relate with and find truth in good stories. So,
yeah, I think that's a great point. And then for those of you who are not involved in filmmaking and are not involved in games or narrative stuff, actually that includes us right now. If you are involved in real life puzzle solving, real life enemy defeating, real life empire building, or nation building or company building, like, you are doing the sorts of things that people write stories about. So I don't want to leave you discouraged that hopefully this didn't come across as like two failed filmmakers making the best with their other podcasting job. There is such a huge amount of work that needs to be done, and I think that there's all kinds of really important, not just work that needs to be done, but stories that need to be told. And Hollywood doesn't have a monopoly on that anymore. Like, in some ways, it's sad that people who have appreciation for filmmaking don't have anywhere to go make great movies anymore unless they're Tom Cruise. Yeah. In some ways, that's sad. But in other ways, Hollywood doesn't have a monopoly on this anymore. If you start a YouTube channel and you talk about dirty jobs or the way that you overcame this, or you interview other people, or you start a podcast, sure, you're not solving complicated cinematography problems. You're not Walter Murch inventing new editing techniques, but you are connecting people to stories. You're giving people to think. You're fulfilling that really important cultural and civilizing purpose.
Yes.
And you're doing it without spending $150,000 a day by being on location. So maybe I think we're actually kind of in a great place right now where Hollywood has sort of bankrupted itself in a bunch of different ways, morally, economically, etc. And the desire that people have to connect with real stories has taken them to YouTube and Telegram and even humble podcasting. So be a part of that, and be someone who's doing the kinds of things that are worth telling stories about. A documentary about a little holster company sounds a little bit boring to me, but there's a ton of other little manufacturing shops out there, people that are getting involved in actual aerospace.
Yeah.
Probably could come up with some really, really interesting documentaries that have the same inspirational core as Top Gun Maverick.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah. So I'm glad that we're in the space that we're at.
Yes.
It's fun that we.
This is a cool space.
It's a cool space. The citizen defense industry is a really interesting place to be, and in some ways, it reminds me of filmmaking because it touches so many different aspects. There is the manufacturing aspect. There's the science and technology aspect. There is the instructional, inspirational aspect and connecting with people. Yeah. There's the history that you need to study to do this. So it scratches all of those multidisciplinary itches that I miss from filmmaking.
Yeah, and there's an aspect to it as well where, equipping serious citizens being kind of the motto is this industry, we are enabled to equip people to be kind of the hero of their story.
Yes.
And that attitude of like, hey, take charge, prepare yourself, train yourself, be prepared to be a hero. You never know when the call is going to come. That's extremely cool. And I love being a part of it. And I think it's just, it's in a kind of a disconnected way. It is like connecting the story, the story of everyone out there who is the hero of their own little world. So,
right. Step up and do the stuff that the other people are going to make movies about.